Hello, everybody, and welcome to episode number 10 of I Wish You Were Dead, a podcast about things that used to be alive. My name is Mike, and that is Gavin. Gavin, we have officially made it to double digits.
I know. I'm very excited. As should our our listeners should be too. You know, sometimes, especially during quarantine, people have sort of been like started a hobby and then not followed it through. So I'm glad that that's not us.
I am very glad that's honest. That was definitely a worry of mine, is that this was going to be started. We do 2 or 3 episodes, and I'm glad we've continued it for the nice little audience that we have, and we thank you all very much for listening. And we've actually got some good news for those of you that are listening. You may have already seen this, but Gavin has not. I'm going to give him a reveal on air. We were able to find a nice local artist to make a new logo for us, or new cover art for us, I should say. Our old cover art with the skull and just the text across was some default stuff that Anchor.fm allowed us to use, which worked just fine. But Gavin, I am going to send you right now the new cover art that we are going to have. And
yeah, this is my first time seeing it. So let's see.
Gavin's first time seeing it, and so I'm curious. I want the live reaction.
Oh, I like that a lot.
It really is cool.
I like that a lot. Like, oh, that's a very I really like how the skull's eyes are different sizes.
Absolutely.
It's like, or at least different shapes.
And the wire coming out of the headphones spelling out that it is a absolutely wonderful logo. It was made by a local high school student who was very nice enough to do this for us. This student has been paid. To anyone who is asking high school or college students to make stuff for them, pay your artists. Don't just say this will look great on don't just say this will look great on your resume and ask your friends to do stuff for you for free, because that kind of makes you a jerk. So definitely pay your artists if you're asking them. I don't have her permission yet to share her name. If I ever do get permission, I will definitely share her name and hopefully send a little more business her way, because this is absolutely fantastic cover art, and she deserves that praise.
And that whole point of supporting your local artists, especially like your artist friends, is especially true these days with the pandemic, just because their income was irregular before the pandemic, and with people just having less money in general, it's not like people who are independent contractors make their money from art pay into like unemployment from their paycheck, because that's just not how being an independent contractor works. So they haven't been really eligible for a lot of the unemployment benefits that the government has been providing, limited as they may be to begin with, especially people who are in like the creative, economy have been really, really struggling. So if you are at all able, go support your local artists.
Absolutely. As somebody who had a brief stint in art school myself, I can say the whole, this will look great on your resume thing gets old after a while, because at some point your resume should be able to get you some actual work. So please pay your artists. Please pay your friends if you are at all able to. And with that, we're going to make a real hard segue into what I think our topic of the day is. And this is going to be...
Well, wait, Mike, you're forgetting something.
Oh, I am forgetting something. Okay.
We have our This Day in Science.
Well, fair enough. We can make yet another hard left and and talk to us. So this episode is going to be coming out on... It is February the 10th is when this episode is going to be coming out. So Gavin, February the 10th in science history. Talk to me here. What has happened?
Well, this has a little asterisk on it. So I mentioned to Mike before we started recording last week that sometimes whatever day, the Wednesday on the calendar, cool science, but doesn't really pertain to what this podcast does. And, last week was convenient in that it did. This week's did not. This week's, Today in Science, February 10th in Science, was about comets. Neat, but not really pertains to our podcast. So what I decided to do instead was switch it to like look through this week in science and find the most relevant thing to the podcast.
Which I wholeheartedly support.
So this comes from February 12th, so Friday, from 2018. The headline is "Microfossils May Cause Massive Landslides."
What's a microfossil?
It's exactly what it sounds like. They're just very, very small fossils. typically it's referring to, at least in my world, because I'm a vertebrate paleontologist, refers to things like really small teeth, such as like rodent teeth, but also can refer to, various single-celled organisms that also tend to leave lots and lots of fossils.
Okay, and it said they were going to cause landslides?
Yeah, so marine geoscientists from the Geomar Helmholtz Center for Ocean Research in Germany published their work concerning the origin of gigantic seafloor landslides. These slides, known to move thousands of cubic kilometers of Earth and potentially trigger tsunamis, often occur on stretches of seafloor with an incline of only 3 degrees. Scientists had long wondered how such titanic events could develop with such a slight incline, but they now believe that the existence of microfossils called diatoms, which are these, it goes on to explain, so I'll just let them do it, may be the cause. The tiny fossils compact into sedimentary layers rich in clay and moisture, which then serve as a weak link in the ocean floor stability. The team hopes further research will help better predict seafloor landslides and help prepare for their consequences.
So this is like just imperfections in the seafloor itself, that are the imperfections are these microfossils. And when you have enough of those imperfections, you can trigger one of these landslides. Is that about right?
Sort of. So diatoms, like I mentioned, they're these little single-celled, like photosynthetic organisms. So they're sort of, to most people, they're similar to algae, but they actually make a little shell out of silica, which is essentially quartz. And so as they die, they float around in the water until they die, and then they sink. And so if there's, for example, like a big influx of nutrients that'll cause lots and lots of diatoms to grow, and then all of them are going to die at roughly the same time. So just that, sudden layer of like increased diatoms relative to like the sediment above and below it might cause like a weak plane in the sediment there. And if you're just, building up, thousands and thousands of tons of sediment above them, even though it might only be at like that 3% incline or 3-degree incline, if there's that weak plane, it might only be a 3-degree incline, but these inclines can stretch for a very, very long distance. So by the time they get to the end of the incline, when it kind of drops off and makes those tsunamis, those sediment can be moving very, very quickly. And we actually have a term in geology for that, and they're called turbidites. That's the kind of rock that gets deposited by these kinds of, seafloor landslide events.
Turbidites, you said?
Yep. Or so the term for all of that sediment sliding is called a turbidity flow.
Turbidity. Ooh, I like that. Turbidity flow.
Yep. So turbidity is just the general, it's like the more scientific word for like murkiness in the water.
Okay.
So it's like all that sediment in the water. And these turbidity flows kick up all the sediment and are basically just an underwater, rock slide or landslide, like they said. And then normally on the seafloor, sediments sort of can sort themselves by like size. So like with big stuff at the or with turbidites, they're sort of organized by size. So you have the big stuff at the bottom, then slightly smaller stuff above it. So it's like be like fist-sized rocks at the bottom, then like, I don't know, pebbles and stuff a little above that, and then like clay above that. So that's really diagnostic of a turbidity flow and a turbidite. But normally you would see pretty much only a single kind of sediment at a certain water depth, because that's just the way the sediment sorts itself out in the water.
And to think that I almost skipped over this segment, which isn't even our main topic for today. We are already learning so much extra stuff.
Yeah. But with that actually translates pretty well into some of our fieldwork, because I've actually seen some of these turbidites preserved in rocks in my various times of fieldwork. So if the title didn't give it away, we are picking up from episode 4, where I talked about fieldwork, with sort of the latter parts of my fieldwork. We only got to toward the end of my undergraduate education, and now we're picking up where I left off there. and moving through today.
Correct. And so this is going to be our second consecutive part 2 episode.
Yep.
Similar to the last one. I assume it's not going to be required that you listen to part 1 if you've just recently found our podcast. Hello. You can listen to this one and you'll be pleasantly well informed. However, go back and listen to episode 4 of that podcast because there's a lot of great information about Gavin's kind of introduction into this field, his first couple experiences with fieldwork, and we also talk about some of the inequities inherent in fieldwork. So that's definitely an episode to go check out and go listen to. But with all that out of the way, we are going to continue on with the fieldwork, and we are going to be starting. We are still in New York State with this first one, I see.
Yeah, so where we left off was just sort of the various fieldwork that I did, like 4 classes, where I mentioned that for, I think, all of my geology classes, except for one that I took at my alma mater, SUNY Cortland, all of them except for one had a required Saturday-long field trip doing fieldwork, and also had a unique class that I've not, still in talking to all of my, around 10 office mates, their undergraduate universities didn't have anything even similar to this class, but a class that like rotates each semester with who teaches it. And we take a weekend long or occasionally a spring break long field trip focusing on their specialty. So we went through some of those trips that I had taken, but now those were all sort of little snippets. Like I said, for only, at least the ones that I went on, about 2.5 days, like 2 to 2.5 days total. The first piece of field camp or field work that we're talking about today, I was out there for 5 weeks straight. And that is what we call field camp. So most degree programs have something that's called a capstone class. I don't know if that's something you had to do as a history education major. But
fortunately, I'm not exactly sure how. I kind of skipped out on all of that between my political science degree and my teaching degree. I never had to do anything that was sort of like a huge culmination. The closest thing would have been a history minor. There was a big class that we had to take, but even there, I was able to kind of skip out on the horrors of that end class that I've seen many of my friends go through.
Yeah, so even with this, so this is something that's required of every geology degree that I have ever heard of. And then some people, such as my roommate is one of my office mates. She had to do field camp and a capstone class, which is rough. So field camp, essentially, is when you go out and spend generally between 4 and 6 weeks out in the field, learning geology and actually doing geology firsthand. Whereas, some of these other experiences, like, yeah, that's what we were doing, but our teacher kind of like held our hand along the way. That was not the case at all for field camp. So I'm going to talk about my specific field camp experience, whereas a lot of other schools do it totally differently. Many schools don't even offer their own. So like students so for example, there were about 26 total students at mine. Around half were from my school. The other half were from schools, all around sort of the mid-Atlantic type area, mid to North Atlantic. So we had a couple students from a couple universities in New Jersey, some from Pennsylvania, a handful of other from New York. And so it was really interesting. So ours was split into 5 weeks, and each week had its own projects. So the first week was our sedimentary geology and stratigraphy week. So stratigraphy is basically being able to read, look at layers of sedimentary rocks and being able to understand what they tell you about like a depositional environment, what the environment in that spot was back when those sediments got deposited. And basically being able to read it like a book and seeing what this layer with these characteristics beneath this other layer with these other characteristics tells you about environmental change over time. So that's what we were doing that week. And essentially, we had to wake up at about, I suppose before I get into what we did for the weeks, I should talk about like the field, like the camp itself. That really also, varies wildly from school to school, or field camp to field camp. Mine, we were lucky enough to have a former student who unfortunately like passed away relatively young. But their family, that student's family, owned a spot of land a little bit south of Albany, New York, which is in like the eastern part of New York State. And they donated this spot of land to the school and to the department because of how much this student really loved the department, loved the school, and so they ended up building our field station on it. So we had like one bunkhouse split into like two sides that I think like 6 or 7 people could stay on each side, and then like the main lodge, which had like a full kitchen, like full like industrial kitchen too. A couple office spaces, and then also another couple bunk rooms for 6 to 7 people. Some other field camps are literally just staying in a tent for the whole 5 weeks.
Would you prefer that?
We will talk about that when we get to my second field camp.
Okay.
Because that's what we did there. But yeah, so I stayed in sort of the bunk house, separate from the main like lodge type place. So we had one like chef that would come in. He would cook breakfast in the morning, and he would cook us dinner at night. And everybody was like assigned, a specific day to do various things, whether it was, breakfast, dishes, cleaning the bathrooms, various things that needed to be done around the camp. So breakfast was at 7 in the morning. If you were on kitchen duty, you had to be there at 6:30. And so we ate and then made our lunches for the day. And then by 8:15, we were out the door in these big 12-passenger vans. So for week 1, we were dropped off at a road cut, which is, when you're driving on a road and you see these big cliff faces, they had to cut those rocks to make room for that road. Those rocks almost never were just there before the road was built. They cut down through the rocks to build that road.
Are those the ones where on occasion see the sign that says danger falling rocks?
I would say sort of like a square and rectangle thing, where it's like, if you see that, that is probably a road cut, but not all road cuts are like unstable like that.
Okay.
So by probably 8:45-ish to 9, we were at the outcrop, and our teacher was like, all right, go take notes. We were told the night before. So this was Monday. This was a Monday. On Sunday night at like 8 p.m. was when we had to be there. And our teacher gave us what our project was, which was basically, we're going to take you to however many different outcrops. Your job is to figure out, okay, this layer at this spot is the same as this other layer in this other spot, which is the same as this other layer in a third spot. And you have to sort of connect the dots between them. And correlate them is what that's called. So figuring out, okay, this one, and this one are the same. And sort of it's called a fence diagram. We sort of draw the lines between all of the units that are the same.
So let me see if I understand this correctly. It is, you were told that these 3 separate spots were the same and you had to figure out why, or was it the reverse?
No, we were told basically nothing. We were told, we weren't even told how many formations we were supposed to find. We were told, go take as good of detailed, as highly detailed notes as you can. Figure out, okay, is this section different enough from the section above it to call them different formations? Or there's another term called a member. So there can be different members of the same formation. So it's like, so if they're similar but not the same, they can be different members of the same formation, or they can be 2 separate formations. So we were told, this is your job. Go collect your data. This is what you will have to turn in at the end of the week, is this correlation diagram, as well as a composite stratigraphic column. So basically, we were given, these geologic compasses called Bruntons, which you can use for various things to figure out like because rocks are always, this is like a universal rule in geology, rocks are always deposited completely horizontal. So if you see them not horizontal,
Something happened.
that means something funky went on. Yeah. You don't always know what. The geology of the Northeast is really well studied, so typically we do know exactly what caused this funkiness. But those allow you to measure like the angles that the rocks are sort of tilting at, and that can tell you, a couple different things. As well as these sticks called Jacob staffs that are exactly 5 feet tall, and you use those to measure how thick each section of rock is. So each section of rock, each formation, has a range of thicknesses that it can be, just because deposition is not always uniform. It might be really, a lot of deposition in one spot, but as you move farther away from like the coast, there's less sediment in the water to be deposited, so it will just naturally be thicker or thinner farther away from the shore. So,
and you had a full 5 weeks to compile all this?
Oh, see, no, we had 1 week.
Oh.
This was week 1.
Okay.
So we went to, I think, 12 or 13 different outcrops in week 1. And literally from probably about 9 in the morning until about 4:30 to 5, depending on the day, we were there out on the outcrop. Sometimes, especially that first day, that first day was excruciating because it was like 95 degrees out, eastern New York, and New York in general gets very, very humid in the summer. That first day was like blazing sun, no clouds. So that first day was just miserable.
Was just really throwing you to the wolves there.
Oh, absolutely. And our teacher, like he was my advisor. I worked with him very closely. He almost came off as like a little sadistic and like enjoying our misery, which, like, to be fair, I would too. Like, I'm not blaming him at all for that. But we would ask him something and he would be like, "Are you asking me or are you telling me?" Basically being like, "Are you actually confident in, these observations that you're making?" And then we'd basically just be like, "Okay." And then just turn back to the rocks and take some more notes. So we had basically 4.5 days because Friday was a half day. And we went from everything from like these giant road outcrops to we went into like a bat cave.
Like the bat cave?
So a cave with bats.
Okay. Slightly less cool.
And we had to, so we had to have the whole hard hats on and everything. And we had to, and some formations would be present at some outcrops, but not at others. So we also had to figure out sort of roughly where spatially these were in relation to each other, which was interesting. And so we had to come up with this fence diagram, this correlation diagram, and then a composite stratigraphic column by the end. And I realize I'm taking a lot of time to just talk about this single week, but this is setting up. This was probably, in my opinion, the hardest week of field camp. So that's why I'm talking more about it. So, so we turned that in Friday. We drank a lot.
No, what are kids at this point drinking? Are you guys drinking the good stuff? Are you stuck with, like Natty Light? What?
It depended on the day. And also whoever was,
supplying
the person a lot. Well, no, whoever, it varied from person to person. We didn't like collectively share alcohol. Of course not.
Of course not. Yeah, sure.
So, obviously there were some people who were not 21. They did not drink. But so we had like a fire every night, with the exception of Friday night, because our things were due at, I think 3 p.m. on Saturday. So
that was a work night.
That was definitely a work night. I think I slept for 2 hours that night. And I don't use Snapchat as much now, but back then I used Snapchat all the time. I kept like a daily diary basically on Snapchat and put a Snapchat story up at least once a day. And I was looking back through them recently, and I remember seeing one time stamped at, I think, like 5:45 in the morning. And I was still up. That wasn't me waking up. That was me still up.
Right. It was still
working on
yesterday.
this project. Yes. So, but we got it turned in, and then once we handed it in, we were given like basically the right answers to how many formations there were, what they were called, and their characteristics, because we needed them for the weeks going forward. Needless to say, we drank a lot on Saturday night. And then it started right back up on, Sunday night, because we had like a little extra Sunday night. Week 2 was basically mapping. We went to like a stream bed. And the first day we did your typical surveying with, if you ever see people with like a tripod and a scope, like by the side of a road or something, we did that kind of thing. So we did, we surveyed this stream for large woody debris, basically big logs in the stream, as well as rocks, rock outcrops jutting up out of the stream. And then we made some maps based on the information that we got. And then we did a similar thing with GPS. So like the first 2 days were like with the scope. And then the second 2 days were with GPS. And basically we just had to hand in those maps. We didn't have anything due Saturday. Those were due on Tuesday and Thursday. The like scope map was due Tuesday night, and then the GPS map was due Thursday night. And then Friday we had like a fun day. We had somebody, I think he was an alumnus of my school, but he now works for the New York Geological Survey.
Ooh,
so we just,
that's a fun one.
So we did, so we took a sediment core of like this like swampy area on like the property of the field station. And that involves basically shoving a big tube down into the like all the like gross sediments in the bottom of like this swamp. And there were many, many jokes to be had that day about
about where you could shove the tube.
Okay. There were many. This guy had a very good poker face, in that he was saying some like somewhat like sexually suggestive things, completely deadpan, as if he was unaware that he was making. But there's no way he could be saying the things without knowing that there was some form of innuendo there.
As somebody who has to teach kids about big stick diplomacy, I assure you that's a thing that you can pull off if you work hard at it.
Like, I'll move on, but while I'm moving on, I'm going to look up some of those Snapchat stories and see if I can't come up with an example.
Well, as you're doing that, so when you say you're moving on, are we moving on to the next bullet point here, or are we just going into the next week of field camp?
Next week, but I'll move quicker.
Fair enough. So we've gone through those first 2 weeks, where that first week you were looking at all those different places and seeing just how similar they were. And the second week you were doing the mapping. I suppose we still have, I guess, 3 more weeks to go. So I'm hoping you were able to find a couple of those Snapchats, and I'm looking forward to hearing about what the remaining 60% of your first field camp was.
So from Snapchat from this day, this one's titled, so this must have been my first one of the day. It says, Day 11, coring in a swamp, which is, taking sediment cores. And then it says, lots of, quote, pipe down hole, quote, jokes. We're professionals, I swear. And then lots of, quote, pulling out, quote, jokes too. And then and I apologize for anybody listening to this, but like, this is where we're going. When you study the sediments that you actually take out, you actually have to get them very wet. And
there it is.
Yep. And again, this is from the guy.
Right.
This is from the guy. This professional guy.
He's got to get through the day too. Like if you
exactly,
get through the day.
Props to him. Anyway, so one of my classmates named coincidentally named Ricky. Mike and I have a very good friend named Ricky, but not the same Ricky.
Hey Ricky, if you're out there.
He kept a running list of all the things that he said. And to my knowledge, he's still got it. Maybe I will talk to him at some point and be like, hey, do you still have that? But anyway.
Bonus content.
So weeks 3, 4, and 5 were actually very similar, because we were put out into groups, different groups each week. And we were basically putting together the mapping techniques and our new knowledge of these rocks that we studied and learned about in week 1. So we were making geologic maps of those rock formations. So we were basically given a section of a map that a piece of equipment that we had to have for field camp was a clipboard. So we put our section of the map on the clipboard with a piece of like tracing paper over top of it. And we, it's like waterproof tracing paper in case it rained, as well as we were required to have like water resistant pencils as well.
You guys have the good stuff.
Yeah. And we were on the Monday, the first day of mapping, we were dropped at a specific spot based on like which section of the map we were covering. But then for every other day, we told the teacher where we wanted to be dropped off. So it was up to us. Our teacher at that point was giving us no hints.
And so that must be part of like the, letting you guys learn to walk at some point thing. Like,
Yep.
You guys being able to choose where you're going.
Mm-hmm.
In fact, being forced to choose where you're going, I guess.
Exactly. And you better hope that you actually kind of like the people you get put in your group with. Because you spend basically that entire week essentially 7 hours a day with just those 2 to 3 people. So you get to know each other quite well.
I would imagine. And did you have a good group?
Yes and no. So the third week was kind of rough for me. So on the Wednesday of that week, so exactly middle of the week, I got a call from my parents saying that my grandpa had a heart attack. Aww. And unfortunately, he passed away that day. And then so I missed that Wednesday and Thursday of field work, unfortunately.
Right, that's a real downer. That must have brought down... I mean, did that bring down the remainder of camp itself, or were you able to kind of rebound from that?
Absolutely. Like, if it was up to me at that point, I would have left the class. If they were offering it the next year, I would have taken an incomplete in the class that summer and retaken it the next summer. But they were not offering it. They only offer it normally every other year. But they were not offering it the next year. So I didn't really have a choice.
So you kind of had to stick it out regardless.
Yeah. So unfortunately, my field notes from that week were not great because, I missed basically half of the week. And the person whose notes I used, their notes were not very good.
Must be a dinosaur person.
No, they were just they were not from my school. I will say that. But yeah. So obviously, my teacher gave me the benefit of the doubt and sort of took it easy on me grading wise. And then the next week, so that week we were mapping those same formations from week 1. And then week 4, we went up a little north into some of the Adirondack Mountains and mapping some of the igneous metamorphic rocks up there. Mapping and making cross sections, which is basically taking a map and sort of cutting it and then looking as if you're like looking into the like. Basically, if you just like cut it and then like lift it up so you're like looking at a road cut. So you see like, because when you're making a map, you're making like a top down view.
Right.
But we also have to make a cross section of like what the rocks are like underground. And with igneous metamorphic rocks, that is really, really hard, which is why I don't work with igneous metamorphic rocks. So
you're all sedimentary, right?
Yes. So that was week 4. I had to miss a day. Was it just no, it was 2 days. 2 days of field work for that, for my grandpa's funeral. And so once again, my teacher kind of took the benefit of the doubt for that week. And then the final week was back to the sedimentary rocks, but in a more complex area with a lot more like folded rocks, and stuff like that. So that was my field camp. And, it was both one of the most stressful, even, without, the added stress of my grandpa passing away, but, one of the most stressful, but also one of the most like fun and rewarding parts of my like geology career. So
I was going to say, if it weren't for, the ancillary stuff. I shouldn't call it ancillary stuff, but the stuff that wasn't
Well,
related
yeah.
directly to your field camp, like it sounds like it would be right up your alley. Like it'd be, kind of the perfect way to go out of your undergrad, and you were still able to make, reasonably make the best of it given the circumstances.
Yeah, exactly. And it's funny that you mentioned that because that is how most people end their undergrad career. But for me, I had another year left of undergrad because by that point I had finished all of my geology classes, but I had not yet finished my biology degree.
Ah, so we continue.
Yes. So it is about a year before I get to do any more, significant field work. I think we had a couple of field trips for a vertebrate biology class that I was taking, which was neat. We would just go over and like sort of rifle through some leaf litter looking for salamanders, which was neat. But the next big piece of field work that I did was for a marine biology class that I got to take and was incredibly lucky to take my final semester of undergrad. So this would be spring semester 2019. So I was very lucky in that this class, over spring break, we went to Belize.
A little further
which,
south.
if you are not aware, Belize is a very small country down in Central America that is on the sort of southern side of the Yucatan Peninsula. So the part of Mexico that kind of comes up and like reaches back toward Florida. It's on sort of the underside of that little peninsula. So we spent, we missed the Friday before spring break. So we were traveling down there that day. I think we left from campus at like 1 or 2 a.m. And then we got back. I think we also missed that Monday after spring break. So we were down there for a total of about 10 days. And that was one of the most incredible experiences of my life.
And this is doing marine biology. This is correct me if I'm wrong, your first experience doing marine biology?
Yeah, in paleontology, most undergraduate geology degrees have an invertebrate paleontology class. Mine was no exception. I had that class too, just because invertebrates make up the vast majority of animals on the planet. We talk about vertebrates a lot more because we are vertebrates, so we just tend to gravitate more toward things like ourselves. And B, and because of that, vertebrates are seen as like cooler and more exciting. But invertebrates are by far more important, to geology and to paleontology, especially.
Really, more important.
Yeah, because basically they're what we use to tell time. I've mentioned this a couple times where, in the, I think both the dinosaurs episode, that might not be the case. So, but definitely in, both of the last two episodes, talked about ammonites, the swirly shelled squid boys. They're invertebrates, and we use them to tell time. And I don't think this is absolutely true, but the vast majority of geologic boundaries, so for example, the boundary between, the Jurassic and the Cretaceous, is defined by you stop seeing this invertebrate here and you start seeing this other invertebrate here.
Yes, we've talked about this a couple of times.
Yeah. So invertebrates are incredibly important, which is why, even to non-paleontologists, which is why pretty much everyone has to take an invertebrate paleontology class. So we had and because of that, most invertebrates live in the water. So in invertebrate paleontology, you talk a lot about marine biology. This was my first experience with modern marine biology. So we were down there for, including travel, 10 days. And it was the most incredible experience of my life. So
I assume you flew in?
We did. We flew from Buffalo, New York, down to Miami, and then to Belize City, the largest city in Belize. We did not spend the entire time doing marine biology, though.
Oh, really?
Because our teacher, well, yes, we did some of that too. And by that, I mean drinking. But, so, yes, there's a lot of drinking that goes on during fieldwork.
Speaking as a teacher, I know the feeling.
But we even our teacher, who is a marine biologist, was like, "You
If I could
can't
just
go
make a quick
to."
clarification here, that does not mean
Yeah.
on the job. That just means after hours with other teachers, just in case any potential employers ever hear this. I just want to make that explicitly clear.
Absolutely. And of course, this is all responsible drinking. There were lots of people around to make sure that everybody is safe. But we, let's see.
Sorry about that.
Even
I
our
just had
teacher-
to. I just had to do
No,
that.
no, you're fine. You're fine. I'm back on track now. We're good. So, even our teacher, who is a marine biologist, said you can't, even as a marine biologist, but like as a biologist in general, you cannot go to Central America and not spend some time in the rainforest. So we stayed for 2 or 3 nights. It all kind of blurs together just because we packed so much into those days. At a biological preserve in the forest. And it was incredible. We got up every morning and went birding. And so because we didn't have a lab for this class, most science classes have a lab. This class, like during the semester, did not have a lab. This was our lab. So our teacher was like, all right, I have to grade you on something.
Right.
But she also was sort of like, you're paying, just under $3,500 to be here. I'm not going to fail you.
Mm-hmm.
Like,
right, that's a teacher that knows how to communicate exactly what's going on.
Exactly. And so that took a bunch of pressure off, but also just made it more fun. Because we got up and went birding at about 5 each morning, and then went birding sort of at dusk every night. And birding was something that I was never into before, but now I love birding. It is so much fun. And we did so many things. Like we got guided tours. So my teacher did some field work during her PhD, I think, down in Belize. And so she knew, many people down there, including one of our guides who was, a local. from a small town that's nearby. And so, his family had lived there for generations. And so they know like all like the traditional like medicinal uses of like some of the plants down there. So we got like a guided like tour of like all the plants and things down there, which again, like I am not a plant person, but even I found pretty cool. We got we did the sort of like a lazy river through like a mangrove stream, which was super cool. And I took like a little knockoff GoPro down there, so I've got so much cool, footage and some really cool photos.
Did you ever do anything with that footage?
Not really. I've still got it. But yeah, I haven't done anything really specific.
Just waiting for that documentary they make about your life. Be able to use that.
God, I hope. Our teacher also did make us write journal entries, I think, every day, as like part of our grade. Because she's like, yes, it is part of your grade, but also you will want these, for later, because she's like, you're going to forget.
This is a teacher that is going above and beyond and
I
knows
love
exactly how to do their job.
Mm-hmm. I love this teacher so much. And we went on like some, small, like really, really local, just like on the premises of like the field station itself, like nighttime tours, because obviously it's nighttime in the jungle in Central America. There's some pretty dangerous things down there. So we got to see lots of like just wild crocodiles. They're Morlitz crocodiles, literally like on the premises. We got to see leafcutter ants, which are so incredibly cool. Unlike a lot of other ants you see that like can like tear apart like a carcass in like an hour, these are basically farmers. They go out and cut leaves to bring back to this fungus that they farm in their colony that makes food that they eat.
Going back to something I said, and I think it was our last episode, you ever think about just how crazy like this planet is sometimes?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And so
that's wild.
But these ants march the exact same paths, day in and day out, thousands and thousands of ants per day. So much so that like you can see where the ants go because there's no grass there anymore because they either cut it or just like killed it by all of them walking over it.
Wow, the ants are able. Good Lord.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, just to like if you walked the exact same path or drove over the same path multiple times a day for weeks, months, years, you would just see like a barren patch. So you see, dozens of these little tiny like highways going from the hill to wherever they were getting all of their leaves from. Incredibly cool. As well as some tarantulas. We got to play with some tarantulas. And by play, I mean, like, we didn't hold them, but our guide sort of like took a stick and like sort of they didn't hurt it, but they got to like sort of bite onto the stick and like pulled it out of its den so we could see it a little bit.
Right.
Super cool. Then on our last day there, we did some touristy things, not biological things at all. We went to some Mayan ruins. And we were informed that, like, I don't know about you, Mike, but you being, a history teacher probably knows better than I do.
I probably don't if it's about the Maya. I'll tell you that.
Well, we were told, like, in global history class that, like, the Mayans, like, all died. That they, when their civilization fell, they just kind of died.
Yeah, I think that's like
what
a
we
myth.
Were pretty much told.
That's like the Mayan people still exist, if I'm correct.
Yeah, like, that was the first thing they told us when we got to like the ruins, and like I said, we were still guided by these two guys. We were guided by these two for the last handful of days, and they continued to guide us through the ruins. And they were like, "How many of you thought that like the Mayans just all died?" And I think everybody raised their hand, and they were like, "Well, here I am."
I remember this.
Like, I am Mayan.
I remember this being a thing around the whole 2012 nonsense where they were like, yeah, even people that are Mayan that are alive today are like, no, like, you guys don't know what you're talking about.
Right. They're like, yeah, all the big cities, they left the big cities, but they just made smaller towns. Like, we're still here. We're still around. But so we got like a guided tour from, local Mayans of a Mayan ruin, which was absolutely incredible. Also, and I'll keep saying this about this, one of the most incredible experiences I've ever had. And we got to see stuff like howler monkeys that were just, wild there. We got to see toucans, a bird that we had really wanted to see because it's like the national bird of Belize, but didn't see in like our birding stuff at the field station. And so cool.
It definitely sounds like it. I mean, now, does it make it more cool in the fact that you were somewhere that was outside of, either outside your own country or outside your own region of your own country? Like, is the novelty part of what made it so extra special, or was it that Belize is just such an above and beyond place that, like, that itself took it over the top?
I think both. I wouldn't even say that like outside of my own country, because it's like, I definitely know I would not feel this way if I went to like, a country in Western Europe. Like, I would still think that it would be like an awesome experience, but I would not feel this same way because those cultures are still just very similar to the culture we have in America.
Right.
Whereas the culture that they have in Belize is just it's just different, and something that I personally had not experienced before. So I was just really, it's a feeling that's really hard to describe, to be honest. But that just made the entire experience so much better, in my opinion.
And how long was it you were there for? Was it, you said 10 days, including travel?
Yep.
How many of you were there? You, the teacher, and who else?
So let's see. We had 3 teachers with us, and then 18 students.
So a solid 21.
That seems like a lot. Maybe it was 18 total, so 15 students.
Okay, so
that sounds better.
Somewhere in the ballpark of 20 people, give or take, a little on either end. And so this was your kind of one foray into marine biology. And correct me if I'm wrong, but this must have been the kind of perfect send off to your undergraduate career. Yes.
Oh well, we're not done yet. That was just our last day at the field station.
Oh, there's still more to go. Oh boy.
Yes, we haven't even done any marine biology yet, Mike.
Well, lay it out here.
I know that I'm dragging on. I understand that. I'll pick it up.
No, by all means. I love hearing about how these things break down into different things that we're able to do. So let's continue on.
So after we left this nature preserve on the mainland. We spend one night at the Belize Zoo, which is a zoo actually founded by an American woman, but it's all about local wildlife, and just sort of teaching local people more about their local wildlife because, um, you know, the culture in Belize and in a lot of Central American countries is that people are generally rather superstitious. And so some animals that might be seen as like bad omens or just like, symbols of bad luck are just sort of indiscriminately killed. And this could be, or even things that just like eat their livestock, like jaguars, are just indiscriminately killed. And so this is something that this, woman thought was a problem. So she, raised some money and started this zoo. One of the animals that she has there that I believe is either extinct or very close to extinct, at least like in Belize, is tapirs, which if you don't know what they are, they're very cute. They look like pigs, but have like a little tiny elephant trunk. Very cute, very weird.
Ooh, I'm Googling that right
now. TAPIR. And we got like a guided nighttime private tour of the zoo, which was great because a lot of, Central American animals are nocturnal.
Kind of looks like an aardvark.
Are you sure you're thinking of the right animal? Because aardvarks have just like a long, skinny nose, not really that flexible.
Let me double check this. I mean, I get that you're like a whole,
Okay, that's okay. Stuff, that's fair.
Like,
that's fair.
That's fair. I'm gonna say this counts as being similar enough.
Okay. All right. So we got a guided nighttime tour. We got to feed the tapirs, and we also came across because the zoo is basically in the jungle, so some wild animals do venture in and out. And literally, as soon as they split us up into two groups, so we wouldn't make too much noise for some of the diurnal or awake during the day animals and wake them up. As soon as our two groups split, my group, the leader, we started going down a path, and like 2 feet down the path, he freezes and like puts out his hands for us to freeze behind him. And we're all like, and of course, all of us being dumb tourists, we're like, we start trying to look over his shoulder and be like, oh, what is it? What is it? And it was a venomous snake called the fer-de-lance.
Fer-de-lance?
That is, yes. Which, even though I speak French and those are French words, I don't know exactly what that means.
It means like stop moving.
Well, yes, that's exactly what it means. But it is, I don't believe like the most venomous snake in Central America, but it tends to like to live where near people live. So it bites the most people per year in Central America.
You would be featured on this podcast if you were bit by the snake.
Maybe, yeah. But so we just calmly let it make its way across it didn't even really notice we were there. It was just meandering across our path. And so we gave it a couple minutes. And, even after we didn't see it anymore, we didn't move for a couple minutes. And then we continued on our night, paranoid. Like literally all of us like stuck to like the exact middle, like basically single file of the path.
Man, I would be terrified like where I was.
Oh yeah,
like,
no, we were
where I was standing. Like
that.
there would be like its cousin on the other side. Like, we got you now.
We didn't see another one. At least out in the wild, they had a couple in tanks that we did see. But yeah, got to feed some tapirs. Got to see they have mountain lions native down there as well. They have white-tailed deer native down there as well, which we came across during our time at like the field station as we were just walking around. We heard like a rustle, and of course we're like, all of us are like, oh, it's gonna be a jaguar or something exotic. And out pops just a white-tailed deer, and all of us are like, what? Like this is like the rainforest. You seem really out of place here. But nope, they live there. So we spent one night there, and the next morning we made out for the marine part of our marine biology class. Stayed out on this little island called St. George's Key, with an eco nonprofit called Ecomar. And basically we spent half of the rest of the time we were there, so like the morning half of each day doing data collection for them, and then the second half of the day doing data collection for our teacher. So she was like, hey, I am working on tenure, so I need to publish papers regularly, and you all are going to be my data collection team. thanks.
I'm sure you're all thrilled to be hired.
Oh, absolutely. Like, we were all ecstatic to be there. But basically we had like an intro to snorkeling lesson, which like we had sort of done at the like pool in our school's like sports facility. But like a pool and a coral reef are very different.
I can imagine.
As you might assume. But we had like an intro to snorkeling the first morning we were there. And after that, we were like, all right, here you go, out on the reef. And it was absolutely incredible. The reefs in the Atlantic and like in the Gulf Coast are not as like colorful and vibrant as some of the ones you might see from like the Great Barrier Reef. They tend to be more sort of goldish colors, opposed to like the bright blues and purples and things that you might see in various documentaries. Those are all Pacific corals. But these ones were still, just absolutely incredible. And again, we got guided tours of, everything by this like eco nonprofit. We got to stay with them because we were doing their data collection. I'm sure we had to pay them too, but
well, right.
And I will talk very briefly about the data collection that we did for them, just because it's so wildly entertaining. So we were basically measuring, they're called, most people know them as conch shells. Apparently, so I learned while I was there, they're actually pronounced conch shells.
Are you telling me SpongeBob lied to me?
Yes.
First time for everything.
You would not believe the amount of magic conch shells jokes that were made while we were there. It was like unfathomable amounts of jokes. But
so I'd be the dumbest one there, but I feel like I would get along really well with you guys.
No, you would have. It was an excellent group of people. But their data collection basically involved because fishermen down there, fish these shells pretty regularly because there's actually a sizable amount of meat in the shells. And but you're only allowed to like harvest them if the individual snail, because it's that's basically what conch shells are, is a sea snail, is sexually mature, which you can tell by their lip, or their shell has like a lip that sort of comes out from the main body of the shell once they are sexually mature and can reproduce, basically. So we set up like a 50-meter transect, and we had one person on each side of it that would snorkel down and pick up a shell, pass it to somebody, and keep swimming. That person that they pass it to would pass it or swim back and forth from that person to the person who was measuring the shells. Because we were trying to see if that was putting some kind of selective pressure, like evolutionary pressure, on the shells to sexually mature at a smaller size.
Mm-hmm.
So that person would then measure how long the shell is. There'd be a person with like a slate that you can write on in the water, writing down measurements. And then if it had a lip, we would just like yell lip, and they'd like put like an X or something next to that one. And then, so my job was the measurer. So I basically had a life jacket on and was laying like an otter, like on my back, and would just have the snail on my chest, measuring it with a set of calipers. And then after I yelled my measurements, my job was literally to just yeet the snail as
Is that a technical term?
Yes. And for a potential older audience, that just means throw the snail. Yeet and throw are synonymous. So we had to yeet the snail as far away as we could because we didn't want it to get back into the transect, because we didn't want to count it twice, because that would skew our data.
Does that hurt the conch?
No.
The conch?
No, it's a snail. They're very hardy animals.
Can I ask a question that's been on my mind for the last 2 minutes now?
Hold on. In fact, we actually ended up getting hurt more often because they were queen conch, was the exact species. And their shells are very spiny and very hard and very sharp. So there were multiple people who got cuts on their hands from yeeting these snails, including myself. But it was worth it.
I can only imagine. I mean, so you said this, it was in my head. I have to ask the question here in the name of clinical science. How does a conch shell, or how do they have sex? If they get to a point where they're sexually mature, like what and how? Is there video? What website do I have to go to? Like, I need to know now.
So gastropods, I don't think which is the group of mollusks that is snails and slugs. I don't think they are hermaphroditic. So I think that they are they actually are hermaphroditic. I know that because there's actually a species of sea slug that basically, this is a long side tangent, but we're already here. They basically, okay, Mike, try not to laugh. They
I'll
have
mute myself. Don't worry.
Okay, I'll give you a second because last time you said that you took too long. They essentially have a sword fight with their penises to try and stab the other one first and fertilize them because they don't want to be the one to bear the children and have the eggs. So at least some sea slugs are hermaphroditic and have both male and female sex organs. I don't know if queen conchs do or not. I would assume that yes, they do. You can come back, Mike, if you're done. I would assume that they are hermaphroditic, but they probably just fertilize each other. And then most invertebrates just kind of spew out eggs to just kind of drift in the water until they hatch and mature and then sort of sink to the seafloor and become like a recognizable snail.
That was so glorious.
Anyway, so that's what we did for the data collection for Ecomar, that nonprofit. I won't go into super detail about what we were doing for our teachers' data collection. Basically, a disease came through in I think the 80s and killed a bunch of the sea urchins in the Gulf Coast, which are eat a lot of seaweed. That's like their main food. Which competes with the coral for space. So because there's less sea urchins, that means there's more seaweed, which means that corals are even more under stress than they would be due to climate change, which we don't want. So we were basically doing surveys for like amount of sea urchins per like square meter, I think is what we were doing. So we basically just had like a square made out of PVC that's 1 meter by 1 meter. We would gently lay that on the coral and then snorkel down, the 5-6 feet or so, and try and count how many sea urchins were within that 1 square meter transect. That was what my group did. Some other groups were doing some various things with some groups of fish that also eat seaweed that had like a weird disease going on with them. And then one group was doing something interesting called eDNA, which is basically using part per million DNA in the water as a proxy for like population density. So like more DNA in the water hypothetically means more animals are around.
This is just like a sample of just regular water, and you're trying to see how much of the DNA of a specific species you can pick up?
Yep. So they would, swim away from the boat and any people so that our DNA wasn't, biased, in there. And they would just take 1 meter or 1 liter bottles, bring it onto the water, fill it up. Cool. Put a cap on it, put a sticker on it, label it. Go to this other spot, take a water sample there. We did a little bit of that for manatees too, at the mouth of a river, which I thought was really neat. And we did basically that for 3 or 4 days, and then we went home, and it was wonderful.
And you went home. Did you go back home to college, or was this back home, and you were done?
Nope. So that was over spring break.
Okay.
So we still had at least like a month, 2 months left.
Gotcha.
Yep. So, but that was the last big bit of fieldwork I did in undergrad. So really, really sending it off with a bang.
Absolutely. And that's going to be, I think, sending this podcast off with a bang, unless you have anything else to share. We did part 2 here. We got through the next 2 of your fieldwork episodes. I don't know if there's a better term, fieldwork experiences. And we got through your undergrad.
Yeah, so I guess we're going to have to do a part 3 with my grad school stuff.
That's exciting as all hell to me, getting ready for another part 3. So I guess that we can leave it there. Gavin, thank you very much for sharing it with me. We need to figure out a more consistent way to end these episodes.
We do. Maybe we'll listen to some other podcasts in the meantime and come up with a more official ending, you know.
Yeah.
But
Until then, we're going to go with our unofficial ending of just saying thank you very much for listening and take care. So, everybody, we appreciate you listening along. Shout out to, once again, number one fan of the podcast, Fia. And take care, everybody.
Okay, side note.
Yeah.
So, my girlfriend listens to the podcast. And,
do we have a new number one fan of the pod?
Sure. Hi, Liz. Thanks for watching or listening. But she listens with her mom. So also, hi, Molly. And Molly straight up asked Liz, she was like, who's this Fia girl? after the last time you did that. So thanks, Mike. And also, Molly, really not trying to single you out here, but also thank you for listening to the
podcast. Well, now that we have singled out two of our friends, I think one of whom happens to be a very special friend to you, I think that is a perfect place to end it. So thank you, everybody, and we will see you next Wednesday.